Alright, I'll try to do this as fast as I can because we've got a lot to talk about. A lot to talk about. So, the first movie is going to be Bright, the new Netflix movie that they just put out with Will Smith and Joel Edgerton that David Ayer made. And immediately, they've been promoting it as like Training Day with Lord of the Rings characters. But when you look at the main thing here, it's like Joel Edgerton obviously is an orc, and they're kind of trying to bring these together, but the orcs are kind of seen as another lesser race because of things that happened in the past, like 2,000 years ago, that sort of thing. And so now they're kind of trying... apparently the police force has this diversity thing going on where they're trying to bring orcs in, but right now orcs are mostly just like gang members and hoodlums or whatever. So Edgerton is the first orc cop and is trying to find his place here, but people are going to continuously outcast him because of allegory. Very blatantly obvious, beat you over the head allegory. But you'll also notice this is basically the plot of Alien Nation, the old movie with James Caan, older movie with James Caan and Mandy Patinkin as the alien. I think that also got a TV series. And yeah, so it was clear that they kept saying Training Day, which obviously Ayer wrote, but obviously a lot of people are going to start getting vibes of End of Watch as well, which Ayer wrote and directed. And yeah, when you first get those scenes of Will Smith and Edgerton going around in the car, it does feel very much like Gyllenhaal and Pena in that movie. Kind of trying to capture that same vibe. It's just, oh, by the way, one of them is an orc. So that's what we're going on, but it's also, and it doesn't just stop with that too. They try to bring in multiple current topics, I guess you could say. There is an ill-advised line where there is, I'm not really sure the purpose fairies serve in this scenario, but there's a fairy flying around in Will Smith's front yard that he has to take care of violently, because it just goes around and shits on everything, I guess. So he goes to basically beat the fairy to death, and says that fairy lives don't matter. So there's that. And then there's the line when Will Smith's daughter doesn't like the fact that he's a cop, and she starts crying because she's afraid that he's not going to come home one day, and her fear from that stems from her quote being, because people hate policemen. So, yeah, they're trying to throw in a lot of topical things here, while also going on this really big concept of theirs. And it eventually goes into magic wands. Apparently magic wands are these really... they're magic wands, obviously, that can make anything happen, but also they're extremely deadly, and people will kill each other to get to them, even if touching one kills you, turns you practically to dust, you explode. So you would think, well, this is a really tough sell. When you go into the whole thing, like the whole, Alien Nation type setup, is pretty easy. But when you go into the other directions the movie goes, and it's kind of like, okay, I'm not sure if this is gonna work. And then you realize that the screenwriter is Max Landis. Given his reputation, I'm still kind of surprised, even though his name is Landis, that he's still somehow getting his scripts made. It's hard to say. But I do say that, however, I love Chronicle. I liked American Ultra just fine. I'm one of the few people that liked Victor Frankenstein. I just watched Victor Frankenstein again a few months ago, actually. I think he did Mr. Right too, didn't he? That was a piece of shit. But for the most part, for me, it's hit or miss, but for the most part, fine. But obviously his stuff gets a lot of hate, which I'm not totally, wondering why. It's pretty clear how his work could be divisive, to put it mildly. But, yeah, these last couple times, I'm not really feeling. Even though I did really want to be in this for the sake of Will Smith, because I love Will Smith so much, and obviously, even if he's in a not great movie, he's gonna put his all into it. See, like, his performance in Collateral Beauty is, like, really good, and then you see the rest of Collateral Beauty, and you're wondering how the fuck this performance ended up in this. And he's got that for a few things, but and he does. I'm sure he'll get the criticism yet again that he's just Will Smithing his way through this, more or less. The same thing we just went through with him in Suicide Squad, which was his other movie with Ayer. This movie also has other cast members from Suicide Squad in it, like Ike Barinholtz and Jay Hernandez. But Will Smith here is doing his thing, but once again, though, when you just kind of look at his commitment to it and the fact that he will dive headfirst into anything, regardless of the setup or how serious or not so serious it's supposed to be, it's clear that he's going to give it his all. We really hardly ever get a half-assed Will Smith performance. And you have to give that to him. And obviously there's going to be that stuff like, those just Will Smith type lines like, yeah, you want a titty bar gunfight die. That probably makes no sense out of context, but he finds a flow into that line. There's the stuff like, he's being confronted by an orc and he says, you know, like, I'll come after your fat Shrek-looking ass. I'll bitch slap you back to Fiona or something like that. He's obsessed with Shrek again, like he was in I Am Legend. It's like a carryover, I guess. When he's around inhuman creatures, he loves Shrek. That's the way Will Smith works, I guess. And he really does bring some of this to life. It's one of those cases where you can't really tell what's him and what is Landis's shitty dialogue. Because it's like, in some of these cases you can tell maybe it's trying to be clever and just falling short, but then there's other cases where it's like, maybe it's trying to fit a sort of tone to like kind of be like old-fashioned cop dialogue to where it's intentionally cliche and all that. But even if that's the case, that doesn't really work either. It's the dialogue just kind of sucks. And it's also like, it's also really obvious in regards to like I was talking about with the allegory, to where like all the dialogue directed at Edgerton's character is just like copied and pasted from a bunch of other scripts. There's sometimes where it's like they're not even trying. It's these are like really hardcore calls. Like this movie's really building itself up to be this really gritty, violent, bloody thing here. That's just really going to the root of like those acclaimed cop movies from the day that just really went for it. And one of the things, we got Ike Barinholtz's cop being the very cliche, you know, he's not going to get me or my other buddies killed or whatever. And then you got these hardcore cops in this really supposedly hardcore movie. And how do they torture Edgerton, who they hate so much they could kill? In the locker room, they put a "kick me" sign on his back. Alright. So, speaking of Edgerton, to get off that, it is very interesting watching him work through this makeup. If I didn't know, his voice is a giveaway, but if I didn't know it was him looking at him, I probably wouldn't. Occasionally, there's like a profile shot where you can kind of tell that it's him, but for the most part, that's what it is. And he has that very kind of, he's like the most, I assume this is the point, he's like the most grounded character in the movie, even though he's the one that everybody hates the most, just because of the type of creature or whatever, the species that he is. And it's, yeah, he kind of has that quality to him to where it's like, he's doing his best to be likable and be liked by everybody, but he keeps that up throughout, despite all the shit people throw at him. And it's nice until, but obviously just the whole scenario, this has nothing to do with Edgerton or his character really, just the whole scenario wears thin so quickly. It doesn't really have too much of an impact. And so we go into the whole, once the whole wand thing comes into play, then we bring in some other cliches, like the entirely corrupt police force. We never know who's on the good side and who's on the bad side, and they're caught in the middle of it, and they don't know who to trust. That old thing is what most of the movie is. And then it's like, when you look at this too, and it's like, for a movie that is so high concept, it really does only seem to scratch the surface of its ideas. And when it like picks one direction to go in, and it's kind of like, but then you also kind of think, well, if they introduce too much, then that would be a problem too. Well, The thing also is that apparently Netflix already greenlit a sequel before this one was even released. Um, and I had heard beforehand, I had heard last night that the reviews weren't very good. There was like one positive one or something. But, yeah, I can see where that's coming from, but I do think, it's not so much, I do think this is one of those movies that, the hate for it might be getting a bit blown out of proportion, if I had to guess. But it's because really the main problem, I can see this as a movie that people are going to say, oh, this scene is so bad and this scene is so bad and all that. Honestly, this movie's biggest problem is that despite this concept, once you get a grasp of it, and you know where it's going, about an hour in, you kind of get a grasp of where it's headed, then it just kind of becomes not very interesting. Which is kind of the worst thing a high concept movie can do. Like, it's one thing if it goes so off the rails, you're just like, well, I'm just gonna watch to see what stupid shit happens next, because now I'm just curious. But when you, after a while, you just don't really care. In a world like this, something went wrong. So, yeah, that's what I think is the main problem with it. It's not necessarily that it's everybody does stupid shit or whatever, or the concept is dumb, or they use it in stupid ways or whatever. No, it's just not very interesting after a while. And that's the problem. Like, and it's, and with the way, like, the action is done, I suppose the action itself is competent enough. It's not like, unlike Suicide Squad, you can actually see what's happening. But that might be the fact that they really overutilize slow-mo. Maybe not to a Snyder extent, but it's getting there. And they do kind of try to bring it, up a little bit with, we've got a really decent cast list here. On top of Will Smith and Edgerton, we've got, our villain is Noomi Rapace. And then there's Edgar Ramirez as, like, a really sharply dressed elf fed of sorts. I don't know, the elf BI, maybe. I'm so sorry I said that. Then you have, like, Margaret Cho as the Superior, and then, like I said, you got Jay Hernandez and Ike Barinholtz in here. It's a really good cast, but a lot of them don't have much to do, except to stand in the background and be angry cops. So that kind of sucks. And then there's also Lucy Fry as the elf they have to protect, more or less. It's like that video game character that always dies, that you it's like the worst mission you can get, where you just have to protect them. That's what her character is through the movie. And there are some occasional, like, nice sets, like that, orc crime boss or whatever he was in that room with, like, the antlers, is what it looked like all over the place. That kind of had a cool look to it. But that's kind of few and far between. It's mostly just generic, gritty cop movie sets. And then it's also one of those cases where even when it's like, even when it looks like it's gonna go in a kind of ballsy area, it's one of those cases to where it's like, seconds after something happens to make you go, oh, whoa, they actually did that. It immediately occurs to you, oh yeah, they can immediately undo this, and of course they will, and of course they do, immediately. So it's like, that kind of takes away from that, and then after a while, it just becomes this clusterfuckery of magic bullshit, and it's not really working. I was wondering, like, what it would have been like if it was, like, it felt like it was in a real world. It just happened to have, like, the orcs and shit in it. Which I think is what the idea is, but by the end, it definitely doesn't feel like that. It feels like we've been overtaken by all the magic shit. So, that's pretty unfortunate. If anything, like, the whole concept of the movie can be summed up in that one shot where it's like an overshot of the city that looks really cool, and it just has like that giant thing flying over that looks like a dragon or something. But yeah, it's pretty much just a surface level as that too, so yeah, it had a lot going for it, and it's not completely, bad or anything like that. It's certainly not bad as you're probably going to hear, because people love to blow things out of proportion now. Everything is either the best movie in the world or the worst movie in the world, especially when it's as accessible as being on Netflix, so look out for that. And kind of heed the people that are a bit too passionate about it, so that's my opinion anyway. Going on to the second movie, which is going to be Downsizing. This got really interesting for me, and not because of the movie. But I will get to that at the end. So this is just kind of a bizarre movie all around. The main selling point for me was the fact that it was Alexander Payne's new movie. And I like or love all of his movies up to this point, I think. Especially The Descendants and Election. I'm a huge fan of. I do really like Sideways, but not as much as other people. But yeah, overall, great stuff. Nebraska is really great too. So now we have this, and it's this concept. Apparently, Matt Damon said recently that when he was given the concept of this movie, because he had been wanting to work with Alexander Payne since Election came out, like 18 years ago. So when he was given this, he basically thought it was a prank. Like he was like this wasn't the real idea, and he was going to be given another one. But no, this movie involves a scientist in Norway who finds a way to shrink people down to like 5 inches, and they decide to help the environment. They're going to start whole communities like that, and it becomes, once again, like Bright. It basically kind of becomes like it's two different people, and like you hear about prejudices and how things have to be adjusted to fit these people into regular society. And there's definitely a lot of interesting things here. They go into the whole thing about how it's good for the environment but bad for the economy, and the way people react to that. I think the scene with the guy at the bar confronting Damon is a bit forced, because we already got the idea by that point, but we'll just drive it in a little more, because the movie's 2 hours and 15 minutes. So, and this movie also loves time jumps. Like, at the beginning it makes sense, because it's like, he discovers that he can, the scientist discovers that he can do this, and then there's a 5-year jump before it's a mainstream thing. And over that 5-year period, then it all took off, so it's like, okay. But then we meet Damon, and Damon has this life taking care of his mother, and then suddenly there's a 10-year jump, when we barely get to know him at all. It's kind of like, I guess it's supposed to say his life didn't go anywhere in 10 years, but they just took a really roundabout way of saying that. Because he goes from taking care of his mother to taking care of his wife, Kristen Wiig, who has a headache, because she was working so hard. And then they both decide that, why not? Their friend Jason Sudeikis thinks it's a good idea, and comes down and sighs and says, hey, you know, this is great. And so they decide to do it, but then things don't quite go as planned, and we get this really bizarre, surreal sequence of this procedure. How they have to shave all of his hair off, they have to do something with his ass, they have to take his teeth out that have the fillings in them, because otherwise your head will explode or something. And then obviously we get to this point, and then it goes on, and now you think, okay, now where does the concept go? Because there are a ton of things we could do, because the contrast between this and the real world, we kind of had something, and now if we're just going to spend the rest of the movie in the small world, well, number one, it's going to start to seem look like any other movie, because we're focused on just this one world. But the thing here also is that there's something, this kind of comes into it, because Damon says something. He's made dinner for a date, and he's talking about how every now and then, like, after, like, become so used to it, and because everybody's the same size now, you forget that you're in a much smaller world until there's something that makes you remember. Like, there's a certain product that they don't have in this world, or there's a moment when, like, everybody's singing at a party or something, and there's a giant tambourine. And it's like, after a while you watch it and you forget it until you see things like the giant tambourine to remind you, oh yeah, we are in the small world. I kind of forgot about that. And then it kind of starts to lose sight of itself. There's entertainment to be had when he has a very noisy, party-loving neighbor upstairs, and we learn that this noisy, party-loving neighbor is Christoph Waltz. Being his suave self with his I don't give a fuck haircut. He's got a giant picture on the wall of a younger version of himself smoking a cigar. And he basically, eventually, you know, Damon takes drugs and gets to do all this fun stuff he never knew he could have in life or something. And then it's, like I said, it always seems like we're going off the concept, but then we kind of come back a little bit only to lose it again. and it just feels like this bizarre movie that doesn't even involve the whole there's bigger people and smaller people. Just watching the smaller people in a normal environment when we're back on normal sets with normal sized people, because in their world they're normal sized, it finds other ways to be bizarre. Sometimes in interesting ways, sometimes not so much. But then it takes another detour when Hong Chau is introduced. The actress who has now gotten Golden Globe and SAG nominations. And yeah, I wasn't buying it before, but after watching this, I can probably see that inevitable Oscar nomination happening. She's got a few Oscar clip moments. And the thing about this is that it feels like it becomes an entirely different movie when she comes into it. But the thing about it is it already feels like we've been watching like 2 other movies. This feels like a third movie piled on top of that. And it's like everything is going in a different direction. There is like, this movie has no clear destination for a very long time. And even when it ends, it feels like it just ends. So, yeah, but to go on this, Damon is fine. Damon's usually the standout of movies. I thought he was really good in Suburbicon. I know people really didn't take to that or say it, and the people that did really didn't like it. But yeah, I was good with that. But here, it's kind of like, I don't know if I think the character's just too bland. I don't think it's really anything Damon could have gotten around with the script he's given, which is Payne's normal writers. So you would think we're good to go here, but there's just something so off about this movie after a while. It's like, at the start, you're kind of like, I can see myself getting on board with this. I'm interested where it's going to go and what kind of ideas it has. But it just really, it does not feel like a Payne movie. Much, like, it has moments where you can spot that, but most of the time, it doesn't. I don't even know, like, who, if not Payne, who this movie feels like. It's just kind of its own being. And once again, this isn't necessarily a good thing. But you see that we have a number of people in the cast that's on top of the people I mentioned. There's Kristen Wiig as his wife, as I mentioned, and I was concerned about her because, as I've said many times before, I'm not the biggest Wiig fan, and Reese Witherspoon dropped out of that role to do Big Little Lies. So for me, it's like Reese Witherspoon to Kristen Wiig. It's not a good idea, but then you realize it doesn't really matter, and she definitely made the right decision because this role is so incredibly thankless. So that's not much of an issue. But then we have quick appearances by like Neil Patrick Harris and Laura Dern that are amusing enough, I suppose. I guess because of how unexpected they are. And then out of nowhere, at a party, at a gathering, is James Van Der Beek. And I feel like I would love to see Van Der Beek like really succeed again, but it's like you look at the way he showed up in Labor Day, Jason Reitman's movie, and it's like you think Van Der Beek saw the opportunities and he's like, oh, I'm gonna work with Jason Reitman, and oh, I'm gonna work with Alexander Payne, and it's like, oh, this is great, and it's like both times he's done that, it's like one of their worst movies. So, it's like, yeah, we're pulling for you, Van Der Beek. One of these days, it won't be one of the director's worst movies when you sign on. Your day will come. But then there is also, I gotta tell you, somebody else walked into this movie at Walt's party, and there are hardly anything. I mean, I wish this movie had delivered on this a little more, but just the fact that it exists is enough. A party scene in an Alexander Payne movie where Christoph Waltz is mingling with Udo Kier is amazing. It's like they don't even have to be talking about much of anything. Just seeing those two together on screen, it's like, this is just kind of the perfect mesh. Like, these two need to be in every movie together. So that stuff like that, it's the thing here you'll notice is it's the characters that are keeping this movie alive, because everything else around them is kind of falling apart. It's that charisma that the characters bring to it, especially the side characters like Waltz, and then obviously Hong Chau coming into it, where this her performance was interesting at first because it felt like a lot of her performance was just the accent, like for a while. But then it keeps going, and she gets to do different things. Like she's comedically pushy. So there's comedic moments to be had there. There is the way that she'll do like the worst of tasks with like a smile on her face, regardless of all the shit she's been through, which is a lot. And like regardless of what all this happens, it's like she basically just brushes it off her shoulder. She's that kind of character. And it's like, and she does this in such rapid succession that it's like all the other characters are trying to keep up with her, is what it feels like. So she kind of like starts to really take command at the more that she's in the movie. And she finds that, you'll notice one of the great things that Payne does is where he finds that center between comedy and drama. In most cases. Like, sometimes he goes flat out comedy, like Election, but, like, in the Sideways vein, or the Descendants vein, or the Nebraska vein, there's, like, that middle ground here, and the movie doesn't really find that center, but she does, if that makes sense. And she works with all that, and so, yeah, I don't know that she's my favorite portion of the movie, because the movie, by the time she comes into it, is when the movie's starting to move downhill as a whole. But she does keep this second half alive. Like, I'm kind of surprised that she's getting the attention that she is, because I would think the portion of the movie that she's in would bring it down. But I guess that's not the way it's working for voters. And so, yeah, and then obviously, that is not helped at all by the fact that when we get with about 20 minutes of the movie left, we're going into something else, and the movie becomes a shitload of exposition. We're talking like Nolan levels of exposition, just nonstop, explaining and explaining all this kind of stuff. We've got like 20 minutes of movie left, and it just really, after a while, it was getting to the point to where I didn't hate the movie, but it was getting to a point to where I couldn't wait for the movie to end. Sorry. But then, something amazing happened. Like 15 minutes before this movie ended, this would be where I was ending this review. But something else happened. So what happened at the start was, I'm the only... The showing was at 10 o'clock in the morning. So, of course, I'm going to be the only person in this town that's in Downsizing at 10 o'clock in the morning. I kind of know this going in, but it was confirmed. But it's so early in the morning that I guess things in the theater aren't quite moving along just yet, like the wheels aren't turning yet. So I'm sitting there, and usually because there's so much of the ads, usually the ads start about 10 minutes before the start time of the movie. And I'm sitting in my seat, and it's about 20 minutes, almost 20 minutes after, like, the ads would have been starting, and nothing has come on. So I go tell them in the box office, and then there's like 15 minutes of ads, like 15 minutes of trailers, and then finally the movie starts at almost like 11 o'clock, when the start time was 10 after 10. So, and so the movie goes on, and obviously the movie's very long at 2:15. And so we get about 15 minutes of the movie left, and people start to come into the theater. And I was like, oh, the other showing of Downsizing is starting to bleed into this. But I start to realize that it's a mother and a child. A little girl. It's like, whoa, that's weird. Okay. I hope nothing too R-rated happens. Because there was like a whole bunch of dicks at the beginning during the procedure and all that. And there's language, so it's like, hope none of that happens. And then an old dude comes in with a little girl. And then he sits here. And it's clearly downsizing. I mean, surely people know what downsizing is. When they see Matt Damon and Christoph Waltz in this weird world, they know that it's downsizing and not... And it's in mid-movie. But I was like, okay, something's up, because this is not the downsizing crowd. People and their kids are not the downsizing crowd. What's going on? And the movie is getting closer and closer to the end, and more people are coming in with their children. and there's quite a few by this point. And so the movie keeps going, and it's like, nobody is acknowledging this. Nobody's going outside to ask an employee what's going on. Nobody's looking to me because I was already in there. Nobody's asking any questions. The kids aren't saying anything. The parents aren't saying anything. Nothing. They're just watching the end of Downsizing. And then Hong Chau comes out and has this whole stream of fucks. where she's screaming at Matt Damon about hate fucks and love fucks, and there's like 6 different fucks that she mentions, and Damon's like, don't say fuck anymore, say making love or something. And I'm looking around and nobody is reacting. The mothers aren't panicked, the kids aren't reacting. It's like I'm hallucinating there's other people in here with me. Nobody's getting up and leaving. They're just waiting as this is going on. And then Damon comes running out and screams, "It's a love fuck!" And nobody is moving. And it's so bizarre. I was so hardly paying attention to the last 10 minutes of this movie because I could not believe what was happening. And so the movie ends, I awkwardly get up and walk past all the moms and all their children, and I leave. And I pass by the screen on the outside of the door, and it turns out, obviously, this is not my showing of Downsizing bleeding lately into the next showing of Downsizing. No, the next movie that's going to play in this theater that was supposed to start 10 minutes ago was The Star, the animated movie about the donkey and the baby Jesus. This was one of the weirdest movie experiences I have ever had. And I don't know, it was so weird. Like, it'd be one thing, like, it would have been amusing to me if people were panicking and walking out of the theater and all that, but it just weirded me out that nobody had anything to say about this. They just sat and they watched and they waited for The Star to start, while Hong Chow and Matt Damon are screaming about the kind of fucks that they would do or have. So that's the extent of Downsizing. That is far and away the most interesting thing to me about Downsizing, is that I will forever have this fucked up weird story to go with it, because the movie was not giving me much of anything after a while. So, yeah, in an Alexander Payne movie starring Matt Damon where people are this fucking tall, that's the most interesting thing I have to tell you. So, yeah, I mean, okay, so it's mainly, after a while, really gets about the environmental message. And I'm definitely one of the, I hope, many people that thinks, yes, the protection of the environment is an incredibly important thing. But this movie is just so fucking dull about that, and so obvious in all this, and so off the damn rails, like it doesn't know what the fuck it's doing. It's really hard to understand. It's really weird to me that Alexander Payne made this. But maybe next time. This could just be one off. I mean, look, with what he's made, this just has to be some miscalculation, oh, well, we tried that, didn't work, let's move on and be genius again. Let's hope that happens. So, the third movie is going to be, let's go with The Greatest Showman. So, this is that movie that I feel like we've been hearing about forever, where Hugh Jackman was going to play P.T. Barnum. I feel like that's been on his IMDb page for years, and we've been hearing about developments and not-so-developments, and then finally it eventually came forward. I have no idea if this is the movie it was always intended to be, but, yeah. And it doesn't help that it started off with one of those, that same thing Coco did, when it's with the director and Jackman talking to us and, like, thanking us for being here and shit. It was really awkward because they were like, it's so good, like, I'm so glad you came to see this in a theater with an audience. It's me and, like, 3 other people. But, you know, okay, I'm glad I made you happy, Hugh Jackman. So, it begins, and obviously I had been hearing some bad things, and I already kind of had an idea in my head. I talked about this in the prediction videos, because it was like, this originally built itself up like it was going to be some big Oscar movie. Like some big musical biopic or something, and then it turned out that Zac Efron and Zendaya were in it too, and I was like, oh, so that's what the movie is. No, okay. So it's going to be more High School Musical, less whatever acclaimed musicals we've been having. Obviously there were going to be a lot of references to Moulin Rouge, but yeah, we'll get there. But the thing here is that with my lack of faith in what I've been hearing, when the movie started, I thought we might be okay. Because, you know, we got the classic 20th Century Fox logo, a bit obvious, but okay. But then it cuts out and it goes into the new logo, and the music has obviously drastically changed and is drastically more updated. And it's like, okay, I kind of see what you're doing here. This is how you're going to mesh the tones here, because you want to do the classic thing, but you also want to do the modern thing. Okay, I got it. And then it begins, and we got this really fucking cool scene of Jackman's silhouette, like, under the bleachers, with everybody stomping. And it's like, this is an awesome entrance. Like, not just for Jackman, but for the movie. It's like, this is a cool opening. And it's like, so where do they fuck up, I wonder? It's like, because you know it's coming. You know it's too good to be true in the first 5 seconds. And not necessarily that I go into a movie looking for it to fuck up, but, you know, it just... You kind of wonder when you hear the reaction. It's kind of like, so where do people think it goes wrong? And it does come quite quickly. It goes right into... Well, for starters, we get the nice little circus thing. And then, like, this really fake-looking Zendaya comes up to the camera, flying through the air on a trapeze. And it's kind of like, wow, that just doesn't look real at all. And then it's like, if you think that your focus is going to be the circus, you would think you would put effort in making the shit look real. Like, make all the acts look real and all that stuff, because that's the whole appeal of the circus, is to see this stuff like this. And the fact that it's real people doing this without tricks and shit. When the circus scene immediately feels fake in the opening number, feels like an issue. But then we go one step further, and it's like, well, okay, how do you bring down this cool opening, regardless of the fake-looking circus? And then we dissolve on Jackman, and then he goes into a child. It's like, okay, so we are doing the biopic thing. We're starting from him being a poor, misunderstood child, and he's going to meet little Michelle Williams, and her parents won't approve of his family and all that. And then his parents are going to die, and he's going to be homeless, and then Supreme Leader Snoke is going to hand him an apple, and then that's going to give him the idea that, hey, you know, I should start something. Maybe performing. And then he sees something, and then it's like, it slowly builds, not very cohesively, into him, starting off with, like, what's basically a wax museum, and then ultimately the circus. But we have to go through his whole damn story first. But to their credit, we kind of speed through the childhood. But then at the same time, you kind of wonder what the damn point of it is. Because he talks about his childhood so much in dialogue, it's kind of like, if you take out the whole childhood portion, you could cover everything that shit covers with just him talking about it. And I know there's, like, the whole show don't tell rule, but I mean, like, in this particular case, it's like, we know this shit. We know this structure. It doesn't need to be here. We know this, because that's not what we're fucking here to see. We're here to see P.T. Barnum make the damn circus and watch this shit be awesome and all that. And so it takes its time. It really takes its time to get to that stuff, while at the same time speeding up. The pacing is fucking weird. So there is all that. So once we get all that, you realize it's like, okay, well, it's time to be bored, and then we go on, and it's like, oh, well, it's kicking into gear pretty quickly, let's see what happens. But it always finds a way to, like, hit the brakes at just the wrong time. Especially bringing in a bunch of unneeded characters, with some very uninspired songs. And it's like, this is one of those movies where sometimes the songs are so forgettable. While you're watching it, you forget it's a musical when there's not a song. And then when a song starts and you remember it's a musical, like, your heart sinks and you're like, well, great. And the choreography is, like, really generic, too. But that's not to say, like, I know that's very dismissive of, like, these dancers that, like, work really hard and are, like, giving it their all, and, like, this is, you know, their passion and all that. And it's like, so it's, but, I mean, when you look at it from the perspective of other movies like this, it all feels very generic, unfortunately. As much as I'm sorry to say it about the people that, you know, really work on these movies, but this is just, it just really does not have that grand feel that a story like this really should. That's like the whole, this is a guy that created show business, and this is what we have. It feels very lacking. But on that topic, I will say that obviously when you have a bad movie starring Hugh Jackman, I don't know if Pan is an exception here or part of the rule or what, but the point I'm getting at is that we all know that Hugh Jackman's charisma goes a really long way. Like, you could be watching the crappiest of crap, but if Hugh Jackman's giving it his all in it, there's gonna be something there to draw you in, for sure. This is like, because this is like, people know like Wolverine and all that, and like The Prestige, whatever, and Prisoners. But I mean, stuff like this is like Hugh Jackman's wheelhouse. Like this is what he like came from. This is his thing, and he really does bring that here. Like I'm not even. I mean, obviously it's just the token nom because it's a musical, but I'm really not even that upset about his Golden Globe nomination, if I'm being honest. I mean, I'm sure there's more deserving people it could have gone to, but I'm not mad about it. Because he really throws himself into this stuff, and he works, but everything around him is just, like, okay, well, let's talk about the styles meshing. The problem is that they don't really mesh very well, but I know they're trying to do, like the Moulin Rouge thing, which, obviously, Moulin Rouge is one of my favorite movies, so the question is, why does it work in Moulin Rouge for me, but not here? And it's really just... well, here's the thing, is that Moulin Rouge takes that concept and goes with it full force for a straight 2 hours, and just feels like Moulin Rouge is one of the most fucking alive movies ever. And I know that's the criticism it receives as well, but I love that movie. Then it's just such a pure shot of adrenaline, that entire movie, and it's just so wicked and fantastical, and everybody is just off their damn rocker and giving it everything. In this movie, like I said, has those moments where it's like, it's trying to do this, but for starters, Moulin Rouge was mixing a lot of styles and a lot of different songs, and while that might seem messy, it actually, what I felt, gave it a pretty good balance. But here, we're like really trying to do like the pop thing amidst this setting, and it feels very, like, once they do one song, you pretty much know all the songs at this point. You know the dance numbers, what they signify in the story, all of that. And it's just... when this movie's supposed to be alive is when it's at its most bland, is the issue. And they get really focused on the business angle. I mean, like, you go to a movie called The Greatest Showman, with a movie starring Hugh Jackman about P.T. Barnum creating the circus. It's kind of like, you get the idea of this spectacle, but they don't want to focus on the spectacle too much. They want to focus on all this backstage business stuff as well. And that might have been an interesting movie by itself. The business angle of a circus, I would probably watch that. That's kind of Water for Elephants, actually. But this movie just portrays both sides of what it's trying to do so weakly that it just doesn't come through in that way, and doesn't really grab you or really, you know, sway you off to wherever it's trying to get you. With all these characters and all that. There's also, the introduction of Efron is very much stopped this movie dead, because it's the case of, we introduce Efron, and he's doing the business side here, he's helping Barnum get things kind of out in the open. But then suddenly he finds that he has the hots for Zendaya. And he proclaims this by just looking at her from a distance occasionally, and like looking away when she notices. And that's the extent of this. And they try to do this whole set the time period where like his parents get mad that he's, you know, fraternizing with the help or whatever, but it's like, this whole portion of the movie feels out of nowhere, like halfway through, and has nothing to do with fucking anything that's going on at this point. This is straight up full-on filler, this entire Efron Zendaya subplot. Because that's all it is. It's like, it's this whole thing where it's like, she's supposedly this distant thing to him, but it's like, number one, I don't think they ever fucking talk to each other before they decide they're going to go to the theater together. If they do, it's like fleetingly once. And yet it's supposed to be this whole character arc for him. Because he looked at her from a distance a couple of times. And they make like a large portion of the movie becomes this. And it doesn't go beyond this either. It is that surface level the whole time. And it's supposed to be like one of the pieces of our big finale when things come together. I don't know. And then we get the Barnum character turn when we get, I think this has a lot to do with the Zac Efron Zendaya plot as well, and that is the fact that this movie realizes, well, halfway through we need to have a conflict. Doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if we've built up to it at all. We just suddenly need a conflict. So it's like, okay, let's have Barnum get just a little bit of acclaim, and then that little tiny bit of acclaim instantly makes him a total dick. Just instantly. Like, we see him from the ground up, and then he's taking care of his family, he's full of love, he's full of excitement, he wants to make people happy. That's what, like, the little quotes at the beginning and end say. It's like, all P.T. Barnum wanted to do was make a profession out of making people happy. And it's like, he gets a little acclaim because he finds a singer, and suddenly everybody is beneath him. And he's just a dick to everybody. Now he's rich, he doesn't need anything. Efron can take care of the circus because they're lightweights compared to him because he's got a singer. That's our conflict. And it is solved ridiculously fast for how long they drag it out. But the movie's only an hour 45. I guess we can consider that merciful. It probably sounds like I hate this movie more than I do. It's not bad. Like, I don't feel like it's a bad movie, but it's never close to good either. So, just take that for what you will. Because the performers are, you know, enough. They have enough charisma that you want to like it. And that you invest in trying to get yourself to like it. You're not really investing in the characters, you're investing in yourself while you watch it. Because you want yourself to like it. Because they're trying so hard. The performers, not necessarily the writers or anything, but yeah, it's just all coming out blank. And there's also some weird stuff in there, like maybe I don't know, maybe it was just me, but the little person that was in their group, the whole movie looked like his voice was dubbed. For some reason, maybe that's just the way he talks. I don't know, but that was throwing me off because it looked like he was like had his voice dubbed or something, and that was throwing me off every time he was on screen. And so yeah, and then as all this stuff goes down, that's just a sidetrack. But when all this stuff is going on, and we're having all these forced conflicts, the movie just gets farther and farther down that hole, trying to solve these conflicts that are meaningless in the long run anyway. When we know the outcome we're trying to get to, the movie's just trying to stall until we get there. So, with a bunch of meaningless songs, and like I said, just all the same choreography and all that, and yeah, that just doesn't really leave us with much. But I don't, like, hate it. Like, it's not a movie to have a particularly visceral reaction towards. So, yeah, so, like, we'll say a B for effort. But, that's mainly from the cast, obviously. So, yeah, that's what that was. So let's go on to the last two. Our next one is going to be Call Me By Your Name, our long-anticipated big Oscar contender. It took a pretty big blow at SAG, only getting Chalamet nominated, but it's still in the game here, for sure. So we have a script by James Ivory, and which is interesting and kind of random, but we have Luca Guadagnino, who brought us like I Am Love, A Bigger Splash. He's gonna do the Suspiria remake. Somebody really making a name for himself. So we get this, and for a while I wasn't sure about this because I just talked about this with Beach Rats, where I was saying that it seemed like that maybe these this string of how gay-themed movies, particularly featuring young characters, seems to kind of be taking on its own genre, especially in the indie scene. But it's like, it almost feels like they're taking one too many notes from each other, the filmmakers. And it's like some of these lower-tier indie ones are starting to kind of like, I feel like they're kind of starting to blend together a little bit. Stuff like Beach Rats and like, what was that one called? Keep the Light On. And so they kind of lack an impact when it kind of feels like those movies are more or less saying the same thing in the same style. Like, it's okay to say the same thing, but if they did it in different styles, like Barry Jenkins did with Moonlight, in a way that really stood out, then that's what really matters. And if you have some emotional core and some emotional impact, that's great. And obviously I'm not always going to be the audience being a straight guy. Like, there are obviously probably going to be things that don't hit me emotionally or as effectively as it would a gay audience. So I always kind of try to give them the benefit of the doubt in that regard. But, so I wasn't quite sure where Call Me By Your Name was going to go. And yeah, it does definitely come off as, like, it has a unique way about itself. It doesn't feel like it's blending into, you know, other romance movies of the type. So, actually watching it for a while, I don't know if I've just seen The Talented Mr. Ripley or Purple Moon too many times, but it's like, well, obviously we know what the story's going to be, but it takes a little bit to get going, and it's 2 hours and 12 minutes, so it gives itself the time to really build to where it's going. Where we have Armie Hammer show up, who's like a student of Michael Stuhlbarg's, and he's going to stay with them in, what is it, Italy, and Chalamet is Stuhlbarg's son, and then eventually there's going to be a connection here as both of them wrestle with their sexuality and come to terms with how they feel about whether it be women or men, and which one is which. And it plays it up for a while so much. When I was watching it, I was thinking, if I didn't know where this was going, I would think they were setting up a thriller. And I don't mean that in the way of, like there's nothing creepy about it. And it's not like in the way of, like, other romance movies that are, you know, failing, where we say, this feels like more like a thriller than a romance, because they're just doing all the missteps. But no, it just feels like there's some kind of slow burn happening. And like I said, almost like a Mr. Ripley or Purple Moon vibe, where we've got the, you know, dashing, good-looking guy like Dickie Greenleaf in Armie Hammer here. And then we've got the guy that kind of feels like he's still wrestling with himself, doesn't have much of an identity, isn't sure. There's a lot of confusion in his life with Chalamet. Which it's not that he's like a sociopath or anything, but it's like, I guess in this scenario he'd be Ripley if we have to make that, because my mind has now made this connection here, but that whole thing drifts away completely. That was just how I started watching it for that first half hour or so, because it was really taking its time to build this. But then yes, once it starts to break out, and this romance starts to blossom, then it takes us in some interesting directions, particularly with what actors get to do in this movie. Not just the main two, obviously, but on the side. Like, I think, obviously, Armie Hammer's been getting some nominations. Once again, missed out at SAG, weirdly, but he's the one that's been getting the most attention. But for a while, I was much more taken by Stuhlbarg, just because I guess because it felt more like he had a clear presence. He had, like, a warm presence about him. And these moments that, really nothing is overplayed in this movie at all. But just that kind of way about him and all. And some of his deliveries, too. Like, when he was talking about the two guys and he says, well, you call them Sonny and Cher behind their backs. Do you do that because they're gay or because they're ridiculous? So, it just deliveries like that just really... A lot of Stuhlbarg's lines really depend on the delivery of them. And if they were to be able to hit out of the park like Stuhlbarg does, they go a really long way when they could have fallen flat. So I thought that was impressive. But then I started to realize as the movie went on, the great thing about what Armie Hammer is doing here is just how effortless it seems. Because it just kind of seems like, oh, well, this is just... he just comes off as Armie Hammer, I guess you could say. But then as it goes on, you realize that the effortlessness is the performance, and it's like, that's not just Armie Hammer showing up to set and saying, I'm just going to do my thing. There is a whole process to how Hammer got to this point, and you really look at it also from the fact that, I do believe Chalamet is straight, and Armie Hammer is definitely straight. He's married to a woman, so it's like, the two of them are so incredibly comfortable in these scenes, and that's what really makes the movie ring true, is that you have these two actors who are able to do this material so comfortably, because when you watch it and you know the two guys are straight, you kind of look for the discomfort in them or the acting, and that is just not present in these performances, especially when they're together. It feels very natural, and they're very much the chemistry is there. Armie Hammer was saying at a round table that this set to him felt very safe. Like when they had to like take their clothes off for a scene, it was like he felt safe enough that he didn't have to run after a robe when they said cut. And you can that really comes through in just how relaxed the whole thing is. Even though it's obviously these two guys exploring a territory they may or may not have before, still it's just so, for lack of a better word, fluid between them. That's where the heart of the movie really is, and if that wasn't there, this movie would fall apart. And it's flawless the way they portray this relationship. And talking about Chalamet himself, who's obviously doing very well in award season right now, it's another one of those performances where I have a hard time imagining that. I mean, obviously we just had this with Casey Affleck, but it's kind of a hard time. You have a hard time seeing him as like an Oscar-winning performance because it's so downplayed, and you have to really look for what makes the performance so good. And it's like, really, it's just one of those things where, once again, it's just how natural everything feels and how effortless they make it look. Because it's like, with Chalamet in particular, just right off, it's, his name made me think he must be French or something. And then you watch the movie, and it's like, he seems so much like a native here, and there's something like exotic about him, something foreign. And so, like, he just absolutely belongs to this environment, whether it be, like, the way he carries himself, the way he smokes his cigarettes or anything. The way he just flawlessly goes back and forth between languages. And I found it astonishing when I looked it up, and he's from fucking New York. And it's like, that in itself is amazing. But then also, the way it goes, like I said, the two of them working together is where it really comes together. But there are definitely moments where he has to have his individual moments, where he could just be sitting there or anything, or reacting to something, and he just really does bring it to life. This is very interesting. I think what must help during this award season is that you want to keep things in the frame of mind of people voting for you. And what better way to do that than have one of your big, meaty, emotional scenes of, look how in tune I am with this character, and look what I can bring out, while it seems like I'm barely doing anything, when I'm actually showing so much, during the end credits. Like, literally during the end credits is like one of his meatiest scenes where he doesn't even have to, it seems like he doesn't have to do much, but it's all on the table there. And that's kind of unlike anything you've ever seen. So, all of that definitely works. And like I said, the way, really just the comfort of it all between them, where, talking about, there's like the moment when, like obviously the kissing scenes feel very natural, but then there's the moment when he just grabs Armie Hammer by the dick, okay? And there's like no discomfort in this whatsoever. And it's like, that feels like it takes a lot. And I think I remember hearing Armie Hammer saying, like, one of the scenes where, like, literally rolling around on the grass was, like, one of the first things they shot. So, that they were able to go into it like that and bring that natural quality to this, that's where the movie really works. But going on that also, just the way it looks also. The locations are definitely used to their extent, but there's also, like, whether it be, like, buildings, or whether it just be, like, grassy fields or whatever, or when they change locations towards the end also really brings it out, or just the way the sun lights things in the scene. But then there's scenes like, just the moment when Armie Hammer says, "Wait right here," and leaves him. And we just kind of have this lingering shot on Chalamet kind of just walking across the concrete smoking a cigarette. And it's like, he's just standing on a large slab of concrete. And you just think, this looks beautiful. Just the way it's shot, just everything. The way everything is, yeah, those wide shots at all. It just looks really good. So all this stuff is coming together to make this a really nice product. And yeah, like I was saying, it does feel unique to the genre. Like, it does kind of sound like territory we've been in before. And, you know, thematically it is. But with these performances and these characters and just the use of location and the appearance of it makes it all come together nicely. The length does start to become a bit of a problem, especially this movie, actually, weirdly enough, especially since Chalamet's in both of them. This movie kind of suffers from overlength in the exact same way that Lady Bird did. Like the series of events that I think maybe drags me out a bit too long are like the exact same series of events in Lady Bird. And it's weird. But then once again, we do manage to find a stopping point that really just hits hard on an emotional level, once again, regardless of your orientation. Yeah, once again, there are those moments when it might meander a little too much. It's nice when they really soak up what they're doing, but occasionally you do start to feel like they might be meandering a little bit. So there are things that keep it. There are like imperfections in here, of course, but I do think it's very good, even if it didn't hit near as hard as something like Moonlight. And it doesn't feel quite as, its own style and its own thing as Moonlight did. I know it's not necessarily fair to just pick one movie and then compare it to it, but I mean, the last Best Picture winner, it's kind of they feel kind of close thematically. You kind of, the comparison's inevitable, as much as I hate to do that. But yes, so really, obviously, the main point here is what's really brought together is Chalamet and Hammer. In the way, like, Chalamet has this really fragile kind of way about him, and Hammer's that guy where it's like, we know he's trouble because he says that right off because he's like, I'm not sure I want to do this because I know me. And it's like, and it's just something really intriguing about that, and how there's kind of, towards the beginning there also, when I was kind of getting Mr. Ripley vibes, there's like, sort of like an envy kind of thing going on, at least it felt like it. Particularly in the moment when, the Navigator thing with Hammer, where it's kind of like, you see something kind of there, but the direction that it goes works in a fantastic way. So, yeah, I don't really mind the awards attention this is getting. So, yeah, there's definitely a lot of strengths to it. And it's also one of those cases where it's like, when it was over, I wasn't quite sure how I thought about it. So that's like the blessing of seeing movies out of town, is that you have the drive home to think about it. And it all kind of started to come into place. It's still kind of all coming into place. So, yeah. Let's go on to our last movie real quick. Which is The Killing of a Sacred Deer. As far as this goes, obviously the director is now hot off the success of The Lobster, which got him an Oscar nomination for screenplay. And I was okay with The Lobster. I'm one of the many people that have the criticism that I like the first half much better than the second half. But he also gave us Dogtooth, which I found very odd and intriguing, to say the least. He also did Alps. I'm not a fan of Alps. I really wasn't. But I don't even really remember much about Alps, quite honestly. That's how much of an impact it left. But his movies certainly have gotten much more memorable as they've gone on. And I think that this one's probably my favorite one so far. Not just because it has my favorite actress in it, or the fantastic Colin Farrell. But going on this, at first, okay, I like this movie a lot, but I must say, at first, I really wasn't sure. Because the very opening shot of the movie is an extreme close-up of open heart surgery. And immediately my thought process was, oh, well, this isn't blatantly obvious that you say, oh, look how provocative I am, and this is how in-your-face I'm gonna be, and all that, and it's like, oh, well, this is gonna be tiresome really quickly. But, no. Once we get past that scene, we go right into it. And really the very first thing that gets you about this movie is its appearance. Like, obviously, Dogtooth had its, like, there's a lot of scenes in Dogtooth where the camera just lingers, like, in one place, which is great. And then The Lobster kind of had an interesting look about it. But here, it feels like something, like, you can totally tell it's the same director, but it's still, the look still feels particularly unique to the movie itself. There's a lot of, this is one of those movies that was like made for a theater screen. Everything looks really big and really wide, whether it be outside, whether it be a hallway, whether it be like a child's bedroom, everything looks enormous. Just the way it's shot in that really wide way, but and that also can be really setting the tone. Like, you kind of get Kubrick vibes because there's a lot of white in these really big shots of these rooms. And then there are moments when, especially in the hospital hallways, to where it's like, you'll have Farrell or somebody else walking down these hallways, but the way that it's shot, it's kind of like it looks he's walking at a normal pace, but it looks like the backgrounds are going by very quickly, and it's kind of like you feel like, and it's I don't think it's a particular trick, I think it's just the way that it's shot, but it's like it makes you feel like you're moving and sitting still simultaneously. It's really weird, but really cool nonetheless, and very tone setting too. And then this is what the movie looks like throughout, and that alone is what really draws you in. But then this story starts to occur. Once again, a bit meandering at its start, but enough to intrigue you, to where we see him meeting this kid, and there's a relationship between them that we cannot seem to figure out for a while. And that in itself is intriguing enough of a setup. Like, when you have no idea where this movie is going, which is probably the absolute best way to see it, I had no fucking idea where this was going. You have all these different questions you have, and the movie only has so many answers, but it doesn't really give you too many answers or too little. It kind of has you just the right amount of confused, but also figuring it out. And because the way I imagine people will find this really frustrating, because once we figure out what is going on, we have to accept it, because that's the best we're going to get. That this is the way it is. They have little debates about how it works and what it is exactly, but there's really no need to go any farther, because then the movie would completely lose its feel. The whole mystery surrounding it is what brings the tension. Like, this is one of those things where you can't even imagine that, even if they wanted to explain it, how really would you without it being fucking stupid? So just leaving it very ambiguous takes something that could be really fucking stupid and makes it the main selling point of the movie, really, and grabbing your attention and having so many questions and just wanting to know everything about this, while also kind of not to. And the way he really plays with our heads like that is, it's definitely what makes the movie work. On top of the fact that Colin Farrell is amazing, as usual. But there's actually something really interesting about the performances in general. We'll actually start with the kid, where it's like, the interesting about him is that he's nominated for a Spirit Award, so people seem to get it. But I can imagine people not familiar with this kind of style of movie thinking that the acting in this movie is bad. When that's very far from the case, because the way it is these characters are like so... They feel like they're from another planet, really. Like, they're in a completely different setting from reality. Very clearly from the whole setup of the movie in general, but his demeanor is like so uncomfortably polite. Like the way... Like, when Farrell gives him something or says something, and the kid says, "Thank you very much." But the way he says "thank you very much" just feels so unnatural in this context, that it's unsettling. And we don't really elaborate on this for a long time. This is just how it plays out, and you just kind of let that wiggle around inside you until you get some further elaboration, what little you do get. And the way that pretty much everybody in the movie is like this, where like everybody in this movie is almost devoid of personality for a long time. Particularly everything Farrell does in this for a very long time is just so downplayed and emotionless, in a good way, to where it's like, when he tells somebody, I have open heart surgery in the morning, and "I'm so glad to hear you say that," are said in the exact same tone. And so there's stuff like that, and then there's also like when they're, jeez, I'm losing what I'm saying. When they the kids, that's where I was going. Farrell and Kidman's kids as well have this same way, to where it's like all the dialogue is just intentionally unnatural. to where when they meet the kid and they're in the bedroom, you'd think they'd be talking like kids or whatever, but instead the younger kid is saying like, "Do you have body hair? Like, can I see your armpit hair?" It's like, "My dad's 3 times hairier than you are." And then just right off, the daughter says, "I have my period." And it's like these things that no human being would ever say to another human being is how these characters talk normally. That's their small talk. That's their, "this is how I talk when I'm uncomfortable." And it's, the daughter is Raffi Cassidy, who we love so much in Tomorrowland. And she also kind of has that everybody kind of captures that deadpan way about everything. This is, like, there's a moment in this movie that's really great that really shows off this deadpan thing, because it's like this movie has, like, The Lobster was much more straightforward in its comedic moments, but the comedic moments in this are so, like, within the skin of it. It's like you're really not sure if it's supposed to be there or not. But I think this guy's sense of humor is twisted enough that it definitely is. Because when you talk about how everything is deadpan, straight-faced, emotionless, there's a particular scene when the kid says, "Hey, you should stay and watch my favorite movie." And so it's his mom, Alicia Silverstone, and him and Colin Farrell sitting on the couch watching this movie, completely and totally stone-faced. And the movie is Groundhog Day. And they're watching it like they're watching the History Channel or something. And so there's that kind of humor is kind of in it throughout, just the way everything plays up in such this serious deadpan way. In the moment when, in the same scene, when the way Alicia Silverstone stands up after she has attempted to seduce Colin Farrell, and she's mentioned a dessert, but the way Alicia Silverstone just kind of stands up, and it's like she's getting real confrontational when she just says, "I'm not letting you leave until you've tried my tart." And she's just, it's like, it's the most ridiculous sentence you've ever heard, and it's just played up so dead serious, and that's the way a lot of the movie is, and that's where it works, and just really takes you into this weird, bizarre world. And once again, it's one of those movies also to where it's like, if you know these type of movies well enough, you know what you're in for. It's kind of like when I was defending It Comes at Night. When I was like, when you watch a movie like this, just the way the movie is, like just the way the movie tells itself and sets itself up and presents itself, it's like you can tell when you're going to get answers and when you're not going to get answers. And this is one of those movies where, like, once you really get to know that this is not going to be that movie that gives you the answers, the easier it is to accept the concept of it and just go with it, because that's the only choice you have. And it can be really rewarding if you just do that. And I do think, and there are some things in there that kind of give you just little talking points that probably don't mean anything. Like, I was starting to wonder if there was, like, a particular kinship they were trying to get through between the kid he's met and his own kids, when there's a moment when it turns out that his youngest kid, he's trying desperately to get his hair cut. But the kid won't do it, and it's, I guess, driving him crazy inside. But, like, the first thing he says when he meets the kid at the beginning of the movie is, "I noticed you got a haircut." Or the kid says, "I got a haircut, do you like it?" And it's like, is there supposed to be some kind of kinship there between these characters or whatever? And even if that's not there, it just is giving you things to think about, just for free. They may have nothing to do with anything, and that can be really rewarding, too. And it's also, I was talking about how eerie it is the way it's shot. The score has a lot to do with that, too, where, like, the score is very underlying for a while, but then we get those moments when, like, the kid goes to the hospital, and the score just goes fucking crazy. And it does that, it starts to do that throughout the movie. And it can feel overbearing for sure, but it just seems to come from out of nowhere, and at the moment that it does, I think it actually reaches the effect it's trying for, to just really throw you into this. Yeah, it's really hard to explain this movie, in case you hadn't noticed. I'm repeating a lot, but that's the best I can do, without saying too much. And yeah, even despite its weird concept, it still has some traditional feel to it. Like, even regardless of what's going on, some of it kind of starts to feel like, it kind of feels like a home invasion movie. Like, it has the same kind of vibe as that. Kind of like, what was that movie with Selma Blair and James Darcy? In Their Skin, I think it was called. That was an interesting home invasion movie that kind of somewhat gives you a similar feel to these kind of movies. But then by the end, it kind of lifts a plot point straight out of Prisoners. So, Halle Berry's kidnapped. That's the second movie to do that this year, at least. But even so, it still manages to get itself to the end. It might feel like it goes a bit off the rails, and there are times there towards the end where it might start to feel like it's a bit redundant. But overall, the movie did really work for me, and yeah, just its style and its wicked sense of humor, and just the overall darkness in it, and the way it portrays what it is that's in the concept, it's very appealing to me. So yeah, this is definitely my favorite of what the director's done so far. But he's got a very you just can't wait to see the direction this guy's gonna go now. It's really, there's just, yeah, you can't even speculate at this point. You just have to wait. So that should be fun, whatever that is, hopefully. Unless he decides to really, really go off the rails in a bad way, which is probably not impossible given what we've seen, but I'm optimistic. So, yes, that's what we have. As I said before, All the Money in the World is coming out on Christmas. I'm hoping we get stuff like The Shape of Water in the next week or so, since we didn't this week. Yeah, maybe I'll get another shot at seeing the Florida Project at some point. Like, it left the places that I knew it was, but usually in award season, movies have a tendency to leave and come back multiple times, so hopefully that happens. So, yeah, until then, we'll just be looking out for that stuff, and so, yeah, I have no idea what the next video is going to look like. I'm also going to try to do one of those cluster videos as well. It's got like 12 movies or whatever, because I was preparing that and then I got sidetracked, so we'll see if I can do that again before New Year's. And I also want to do the top 10 worst, or the bottom 10, whatever, worst of the year before, right around the New Year's time probably, so that should be fun to revisit. So, yes, all of that.